Hello everyone, my name is Grant Preller and I'm listed as from Fortescue, but I think the same as Julie and Anne probably need to just, well particularly Anne, just need to make a disclaimer and just say that these are my views. I am speaking from an industry perspective and discussing really what I believe is the industry's view on the availability of anthropological expertise. Certainly need it, certainly want it, certainly don't get enough of anthro expertise in industry. So my perspective is really coming from, particularly at the moment, I work in mining industry. I've been working in the heritage industry for about 17 years, stumbled into it as a fieldy after taking a different career path, mainly because I didn't actually think there was any career path in anthropology when I first got back to us, when I first came to Australia. So ended up developing working in a very interesting space. I work in heritage and particularly in mining industry as a fieldy is about as close to a fun job as you get. You get to drive around someone else's $70,000 Land Cruiser through bush with traditional owners guiding you to places all over the place. And absolutely amazing space to work in. As my sort of career path developed, ended up working a bit more in the approval side, and then realised there's probably a bit more to this, and decided to go back to uni, and did my masters in applied anthropology, which was really a result of really coming to understanding that it is such a complex industry. There's so many things happening in industry, and particularly with resource development, but everywhere. Anthropology is a pretty crazy industry. Listen to Anne's comments on the tension in native title. Trinity working in native title as well, but also out in the goldfields, it's hard. It's not an easy space to be in. I would like to say that industry is probably the harder side of it, but I don't think so. I think it sits on all sides. So I think, when I finished my uni, I ended up getting stumbling into a job with an old work colleague, fantastic mentor, amazing person, and really provided me with a pathway on just the importance of what an anthropologist as a consultant, the importance of maintaining objectivity and clean lines of consulting, open questions, asking questions, asking for statements to be discussed, and particularly from a heritage industry perspective where you're doing heritage surveys for developments, the importance of framing statements of places that are culturally important or culturally valuable in the context of the heritage regulations that we work within. It's really important. There's a big difference between a waterhole that a chap that you're on survey with says important, and when you ask why it's important, he says I used to go fishing there. Different waterhole, the elder grew up there as a kid, living outside of town because they weren't allowed in town after dark. They have different contexts, and they have different importance, and they have different relevance. One of probably the most impressing moments that I had back in sort of when I first got into the industry, I think it was actually on one of your surveys, Eddie, sitting in a creek up in the Pilbara with one of the old fellas, and I asked him, I said to him, so what do you think about mining? And the old fellow is sitting in a camper chair, fleet of Land Cruisers around us that have been bashed through the bush to get there. And the old fellow just said, he's pointed behind him and he's gone, we all want these. We all want these Land Cruisers. Like, everyone wants these Land Cruisers. But we've got to look after the important stuff, you know. And then, you know, interestingly, he actually happened to be sitting, as you often do in the Pilbara, picked up an artefact that happened to be on the ground. He goes, we spend too much time looking for this stuff, you know. We've got to look after the important stuff. And that's, you know, I think part of the tension, you know, going back to that word, the difficulty working in industry where there's an understanding just what the importance of development is. Like, nothing around us, none of our society exists without development. We rely on it, we need it, we have to have it. You can't object to development if you live in this world, but the most important thing is it's got to be done sustainably and properly. There was actually, years ago, I did an interview, happened to bump into who at the time was the greatest surfer in the world, still is considered one of the best in history. And I said to him, you know, as a young 18-year-old South African, what do you think about, you know, all the development on the coastline? And he went, there's not a lot in this coastline compared to other parts of the world, but you can't stop development. You have to work with development, try and make it work in a way that is going to be sustainable and minimise impact. You know, and this was on a coastline that was largely undeveloped. And you know, from that framing, you get into an industry where there is substantial development all around us. You know, the side of the industry that I've been working in is largely driven, paid for by developers wanting to develop, you know, and flatten places, and it is part of what we need. But you know, the role of anthropologists in this space is so important. It is such a vital part of how we do stuff as a society, and a good anthropologist and a good consultant who can go out and speak to traditional owners and speak to developers and speak to, you know, all the different stakeholders that are involved in this is so important to everyone, in the same way that a bad anthropologist really breaks the whole system down. Like, the objectivity and the questioning and that middle ground where you sit and create these spaces where discourse can be undertaken is really important. It is also important for the anthropologist, you know, it's more about just recording stories. There's so much more to it, and it is amazing to hear some of these stories, and they're incredibly important to the people whose stories you are recording. But from a working in industry perspective, these stories have to be relevant to the people around. There has to be a way of the reader, the proponents, the person or a body that's commissioned that study to understand what that relevance is in context of their development. You know, I did a survey, quite a lot of surveys as a consultant in the southwest, and everywhere's waterways. It's just, you know, water. The concept of looking after waterways and looking after the country, is a really amazing approach, and I think something that's quite often overlooked with the discussion on woggle and where a woggle spirit may be. But you know, conceptually, you've got a belief of looking after waterways will look after culture, will look after the people. But what I think is sometimes missed is how that is relevant to developers and how it is relevant to the local community. You know, a lot of these stories they're completely connected to what we do. It's healthy country, healthy waterway, healthy culture means that community that lives in that area is probably going to be more healthy. You know, they're probably going to have a better social bonds and better culture. I'd love to see a study on that. But the role of defining places and cultural significance is very, very important. But it's also, particularly with development, is defining in the contemporary context, and more and more the way that the industry is moving or has moved, particularly pre-Jukin, there was the Social Surrounds Act that got brought in. Absolutely amazing conceptual approach on looking at country as a whole rather than individual discrete sites. And then obviously there was Jukin, and then the ACH Act that nearly came through. Again, conceptually, really amazing idea of whole of country and understanding how values are interconnected. And from an industry perspective, there's a lot of that has stuck. You know, I think particularly the holistic approach to development is something that has stuck, and incredibly important in this day and age, and this junction point, I think, in how we develop and how industry supports and provides support for development in looking at the whole of country. Now, previously, when anthropologists or an archaeologist would work together and define individual sites, that whole landscape's completely changed now. Or, sorry, excuse the pun, but it is now landscape. You're looking at landscape, cultural landscape. They are affected as a whole rather than individual components, which it's a fantastic and really amazing approach into developing sustainably, but very complicated. It's very, very difficult to work out what impact is to amenity, or you try and work out what visual impacts are. The studies, it's not a science at all. And the role of anthropologists, particularly in something like social surrounds or whole of cultural value studies, it's so important to have that broader perspective. And the role of anthropologists, I think, is something that is incredibly undervalued in industry. There's a lot of questions that an anthropologist will ask in a very different way to what an engineer would ask, or even an environmental scientist. Different training, different questions, different objectivity. So let me just get to my notes. I'm just jumping around a bit. Yeah, I think from a perspective of where are the anthropologists, where the expertise is, who needs it and who wants it. There's such a huge gap in industry for individuals to be brought into the particularly the heritage space. You look at the pathways that people need to get into resource development industry. When you set it against what is required, particularly in the industry the way it is, where the understanding of impacts to cultural values are incredibly complex, and so much more complex now than they used to be. It's really the time and moment where anthropology, I would love to see anthropology as a prerequisite for getting a job in any company in heritage. It's a really important space and very important training. Sort of reflect on some of the comments on universities that are running courses and the lack thereof. There are courses that are probably run on the back of employment opportunities and employment pathways, and being able to define what an anthropologist and what training anthropology provides to sectors other than academia and native title and proper cultural heritage studies, but extend that into industry is such an important part of where I think development should go. It's a essential skill in a lot of aspects that we work in. I think that's pretty much it. I think palm cards, never using them again. I'd just like to thank everyone. It's an absolutely amazing conference, this one, and really interested to hear some of the questions that come out of it.